Welcome to Sentence Types, Variety, and Combination for your AP Grammar Unit. This is the second part of Lesson 2, which has to do with putting together sentences using clauses. The sentence types and how you combine them is dependent on clauses. That's why we've gone from one to the other. And I promise this video will have less, this PowerPoint, I should say, will have less busyness than the last one. This is a PowerPoint I created, not the guy from Capital Community College. So, first type of sentence, simple sentence. It has one independent clause. That means it has one subject, it has one verb. Here's two examples. The subjects and verbs are underlined. You see the S and the V. Literature stirs. Millions are caught and sold. Very simple. We've got extra stuff in there. It's not just the subject and verb, but the other stuff that we have in there does not make any more clauses. The first sentence has an object. It tells us what was stirred. It's a prepositional phrase. The imagination was stirred. And in the second sentence, we have two things. We have a verb, we have an adverb that modifies the verb when they were caught and sold. And then we've also got a prepositional phrase that tells us to whom they were sold, also modifying the verb where they were sold to. Second type of sentence is a compound sentence. If it's compound, it's got at least two independent clauses. Now, we talked in the last video about how independent clauses can be connected. They can use a coordinating conjunction, they can use a semicolon, or they can use conjunctive adverbs with the semicolon. Actually, no, they don't need a semicolon. Yes, they do. Take that back. Yes, if you're connecting two independent clauses into a compound sentence and you're using a semicolon, you may or may not have a conjunctive adverb, but you can't do it with a conjunctive adverb alone or you create a run-on sentence. So, for example, Ms. Miller set up a schedule of field trips and she took the classroom into the world. So we've got the subject, Ms. Miller, the verb set up. We could stop the sentence right where that comma is, right where that clause finishes, and we'd be good. We have a second clause. She took the classroom into the world. Also, perfectly independent, stands by itself. They're connected by that conjunction, that coordinating conjunction, and that is and. There are no subordinate clauses at all in a compound sentence, ever. Everything in a compound sentence has to be even and balanced. Be careful with this that you don't confuse compound predicates or compound subjects with compound sentences. Sometimes they look a little bit more complex because they've got a compound predicate, but really you've just got one subject and one verb in each clause. Complex sentences, on the other hand, they have one independent clause and at least one subordinate clause. So, for example, what you see in blue, that's the independent clause. Last year, I found myself looking forward to fourth period. I is your subject of the independent clause. Found myself looking, that's your verb. That's your predicate of the independent clause. We also have a subordinate clause. When I took a social studies elective. That's what's in brown. You've got the subject, I, and the verb took, which makes it a clause, but that when makes it subordinate. When you combine the subordinate clause with an independent clause in one sentence, you've got a complex sentence. One last type of sentences when you're combining them. You could have a compound complex sentence, and that means that it has elements of both. It has at least two independent clauses, which makes it compound, and it has at least one subordinate clause, which makes it complex. This particular example has two of each. So I am glad in blue, that's your independent clause. I was pleased, that's your independent clause. They're put together with and, that makes them a compound sentence. What you see in brown, those are your subordinate clauses. That I was in Miss Miller's class. When she received an award. So if we stopped this at the first comma, right after class, I am glad that I was in Miss Miller's class. That would be a complex sentence. One independent, one subordinate. We could take the second half of it and say, I was pleased when she received the award. When she received an award. again, we would have a complex sentence. Independent clause, subordinate clause. That makes it complex. However, when we also combine them, the I am glad and the I was pleased, with that and, now we've made it compound complex. We're going to skip this right now since we do not have our summer assignment reflection in front of us. If we have time in class, we may do that. If we seem to be having some trouble, we might look for them. All right, so why is this helpful? Why do we need to know the different sentence structures? Well, it helps your writing be more interesting. And if we were doing this in class, I would give you a few minutes to fill in these little brackets to identify what types of sentences we have here. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide, which gives us the answers. So, when he was far up toward the top, he lay down and slept for a little while. This is complex. When he was far up toward the top, that's subordinate. The second half of that, he lay down and slept for a little while, that's independent. Subordinate plus independent makes it complex. The withered moon shining on his face awakened him. This is a simple sentence. It's deceptively simple because we've got that shining on his face in there. But that shining on his face is not a clause. We've got one subject, withered, and one verb. I'm sorry, not withered. The subject is moon. And then we've got one verb, awakened him. Third sentence, 50 yards away he stopped and turned back, for he had forgotten his rifle. This is compound. We've got 50 yards away he stopped and turned back, independent clause. He had forgotten his rifle, independent clause. They're combined using a comma and a coordinating conjunction for. That makes them a compound sentence. He walked down and poked about in the brush, but he could not find his gun. This one works exactly like the previous one. Two independent clauses with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, but in between them. At last he lay down to rest. Simple sentence. He lay. One subject, one verb. The pocket of pain in his arm had grown more sharp. Another simple sentence. The pocket had grown. One subject, one verb. His arm seemed to swell out and fall with every heartbeat. This is a simple sentence. You've got one subject, his arm. It seemed. Seemed is your verb. That swell out and fall, that's just a compound infinitive, not making it a compound sentence. You've still only got one thing, and that's his arm, and one thing that it did, which was it seemed. Finally, there was no position lying down where the heavy arm did not cause him pain. There was no condition lying down. There was no position lying down, independent clause, where the heavy arm did not cause him pain. Subordinate clause, starting with the where, that would be your subordinating conjunction. Subordinate clause plus independent clause, that makes it complex. Here's two things that you should know in regards to sentences. And these are not on the grammar test, but I think they're important to point out because they are kind of AP terms and they may very well show up on the exam. So cumulative sentences, this doesn't really have anything to do with the clauses, it has to do with the way the sentences progress. So a cumulative sentence has the main idea, it completes it at the start, and then it builds or adds on. So for example, this is from John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. But neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our present course. That's basically the main clause of the sentence. Everything else that you see here is additional information. It's building or adding on. A periodic sentence is the exact opposite. This is where we wait for our main clause until the end. You've got a lot of stuff building up before it. So, to that World Assembly of Sovereign States, our last best hope in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support. We renew our pledge of support. That's the main clause. Everything else that comes before that is building up to that. One last slide regarding sentence variety. And that is the fact that this helps make your sentences more interesting. Understanding all of these different grammatical terms that we've been doing, and you'll see a lot of things on here that we've already covered. This is how you can help make your sentences more interesting. And I'm not going to take your time right now to go through all of these different things and just read them out loud, but I'm going to leave this slide up for a couple of seconds so you can take a minute to read it and try to make some connections between the things that we've learned in the previous videos and the things that we've learned in this one, and how that helps to make more interesting sentences. Okay. One thing I really like about this slide, and the reason I've kept it in here, is because I think it's some really great examples of participial phrases, of infinitive phrases, of past participle phrases, of appositives. You've got all kinds of things going on in here that I think is a really good review of what we've already covered. So if you're still not feeling quite so sure about those, this might be a great time to review that. That's the end of lesson 2. We'll see you next time.